Hey guys, welcome back to our channel, and we're so excited to have you back for another Portal episode. And today I have with me Joseph, my brothers Tito and Jonathan, who they are usually behind camera, so it's really cool to have them here with us in front of cameras. And today we're actually going to be talking about the topic of apologetics. And I think this is a really interesting conversation to have. So I'm kind of excited for us to talk about it and get into it. But let me just give you guys a definition of what that is in case you don't know what it is, or maybe you've heard the word apologetics, but you've never really looked into it or really heard much about it. So apologetics is the discipline of defending theism against criticism and objections. And just if you don't know, theism is the belief in the existence of a God, especially the belief in a God as a creator of the universe. So today we're specifically, obviously, talking about the defense of Christianity. In other words, are we able to defend our Christian faith? Now, for some of you, you guys might be thinking, oh, this isn't really something I need in my faith. I think I am fine. But some people might be going through their faith and realizing that they just need a little push, a little bit more understanding of what it is that they believe. And I think that apologetics might be the conversation for that. So this conversation is going to involve a little bit more philosophy, a little bit more arguments made for and against Christianity and stuff like that. So if you want to listen to that, stick by for the rest of the video. So I do think it is important for us to know what we believe, why we believe it, and be able to defend it.
Yeah, I would say that apologetics, as you mentioned, is not very common. It's not a word that a lot of Christians are familiar with. But I think it is necessary to, at some point, be able to articulate what you believe if you say you are a Christian. And not all of us are going to become, maybe a professional apologetic or an apologist, I'm sorry. But I think we should, to a certain degree, know how to explain what we believe and why we believe it. I think a lot of apologists or apologetics is more common in intellectual circles and universities. You see a lot of them debate atheists. It's very common. But I think there is a lot of ways or different things we could do to make sure that we can still defend our faith in whatever circles that we're in, because ultimately the goal of every Christian is to share the love of Christ and to spread the gospel.
Yes.
And in order to do that, we have to be able to explain what we believe and articulate it well. So I think to a certain point, we should all get to a point where we can do that in whatever capacity. Yeah, so I think a good place to start would be talking about morality. A lot of debates I've seen between Christians or apologists and atheists, a big theme or a big point that they spend a lot of time on is morality. And what I've noticed is that seems to be a weak point for atheists. It seems like that's one subject or one area where they have a difficult time getting out of. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Why do you think morality is something that's very strong when explaining the Christian faith, or even faith in a higher being, not even speaking of Christianity specifically?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the moral argument, which kind of is centered around objectivity versus subjectivity. So I'm just gonna define those terms. So when you think about objectivity, you have to think about something in which someone can be right or wrong. So an example would be is there a planet, a million light years away from here that's mostly red, right? It may be that nobody will ever see that planet, that none of us will ever know, but the fact that if I say yes, there is, I can either be right or wrong, shows that this is an objective statement. And and kind of the opposite of that subjectivity would be something like what's the best color, where if I say red is the best color, I'm not really right or wrong, that's just my opinion. So objectivity and subjectivity are tied to whether you can be right or wrong about something, objectively right or wrong. Yeah. So the moral argument states that if you want there to be right or wrong answers to moral questions, you need a transcendent foundation for your morality.
To base it off of.
Yeah, to base it off of. So, so obviously for Christians, that's God, right? God is like the ultimate perfect being, and he's what gives meaning to like right or wrong for the Christian. The atheist, on the other hand, doesn't really have anything to base their morality off of. For them, it's a lot more of like a social convention or evolution, right? It's just something that we evolved to like. So for them, something like, we can say torturing someone, right? That's only wrong because we all agree as a society that it's something we don't want to do, or because we evolved to not like that, right? But for the atheist, in a couple thousand years, if we evolved to like torture could be a good. Or if we as a society decide, yeah, torture is fine, torture would then become good. It would actually become good because their good is defined by their social convention. So there are some moral questions which the morality of an atheist becomes fluid because there's no foundation locking it in. And the concerning part about this is just like the best color. If Joseph wants to claim that red is the best color,
I'd say blue.
Blue is the best color. I can't really say he's wrong. Like I don't really have a strong position to argue with him, right? And similarly, if there's a society where torture is okay, I don't have a strong position to argue no, they're wrong, right? So I lose my foundation to defend my moral principles.
Basically, it boils down to because I think it's wrong, which is not a strong argument.
A gut feeling, like a gut instinct, instead of like basing it off of something. And
one thing to clarify is to say this doesn't mean that the atheist doesn't have morals, right? It's not like just because you're an atheist you're gonna be a bad person. As Christians, we believe that God gave us all like a moral compass, and God made the atheists too, so they have a moral compass. The point is, what is the transcendent foundation for their morality? The atheist doesn't have anything to base it off of, while the Christian does. And I also think it's also that we live in a Christian society where humanity has been religious for hundreds of thousands of years. Not hundreds, just thousands of years.
Millions of years.
So it's not like, oh, you're going to become atheist for like the past 100 years. All that Christian foundation is just going to disappear overnight, right? So it's not just that because you're an atheist you're going to become like a bad person. It's more about the objective foundation.
Yeah, but it's also this idea like an atheist would be more likely to just flow with whatever society is saying. And like you see this because like a lot of different societies have a lot of different like ideas of what is right and wrong, and you find that in a lot of cultures, where like arranged marriage is still a thing, where children being married off to like adults is still a thing, where like you were saying, like torture in some cultures is like accepted, like, you know, all these things. But the point or the goal for Christians is for us to, obviously we don't all have that, but it's to have that foundation of God being like what determines what is morally correct and what is morally wrong.
Right. And then the thing is, yeah, with like those societies, if you see a society where like bad things are just happening, like rape and abuse, the atheists, because they don't have one, it's just, oh, we don't do that here, so we don't want you to do that over there. Like our society decided, and we don't want you to do it. So it's not they don't really have a strong place to argue any moral claims from, and so it's just like it's an intellectual price placed upon the atheist worldview.
I would also say that, I mean, we don't have that. I mean, you can probably see it in society now, but if you go down that road, it could be very dark, right? So if a society, like we have here in our notes, Nietzsche, which was a philosopher, and he's known for saying, God is dead. And that's like his most known idea or quote. And a lot of people think, because he was an atheist, that he's just saying that God is dead and there's no need for God anymore. But I don't think that's what he was referring to. If you read more into what he meant by saying God is dead, he actually has a story where, I don't know it that well, you could probably explain it better, but basically the point is, when you have no, like you were saying, base morality, when you lose that, then it eventually just becomes chaos and and anarchy, right? So that's when he's saying God is dead and we killed him. Like, we, over time, we've let go of certain morals and certain structures and standards that we held ourselves to at one point. And over time, once we lose that, then we have nothing anymore. And we haven't, I don't think, in the world gone to a point where it's completely, insane. But we can definitely see parts of that manifest. And I think if you keep going down that road, once you lose all sense of right and wrong or justice or any kind of moral base, then it starts to unravel very quickly, and you have nothing to go for, or nothing to strive for, I guess.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would like to say that, like, same thing with like Dostoevsky, who I like to think is like the other side of the coin to Nietzsche, who like also has an interesting quote, was like, if there is no God, anything's permitted.
Right.
Which is like basically sense the present that anything's open to grabs.
Yeah.
Evil and good doesn't mean anything. Yeah. So that's basically like the realization may not happen right now, but it could start coming up soon.
Right.
If like things like the Christian values start to disappear in the society or the social ways.
I've always had the question, like, where does the value of human life come from people that aren't Christian, that don't consider themselves Christian or religious? Because, like, we see, like, as Christians, the value of human life strictly coming from God. Like, God created us in his image, and that's where our value comes from. Because we're talking about here about, like, atheists not having a foundation to ground their morality in. Because then we talk about, like, torture, we talk about child marriage, and in my head I'm like, a lot of atheists are against that. And so in my head I'm like, we are against that because we know the value of human life because it comes from God. And obviously atheists have a moral compass that's coming to them from God. But I'm just, like, wondering, like, where would they say that value comes from? Because they might treat... Because I've seen a lot of people say that, like, animals are equal to human lives, or, like, plants, we need to take care of plants as much as we take care of human life. And, like, we as Christians don't believe that. We believe that human life is inherently and extremely more valuable than animal life and plant life, even though those are important and we should take care of them. But have you guys ever thought about that?
Yeah, so a lot of what I hear, so there's, like, the position of the rationalist, which is... like, us living in a society is good for me, right? Like, the fact that I don't have to go hunt, that somebody else grows the animal, and that helps me survive, means that I would want to live in a society just for the betterment of me, right? So it all comes from, like, a selfish reason, which that isn't a criticism. The main criticism would be more about the foundation, is your morality. If it's just based on you, then you have no right to argue against, say, Hitler, who's also doing it for the same reasons, doing his evil things for the reason of his betterment. you don't have a foundation to argue against it because that's what your morality is based on too. Or even
Right.
if your morality was based on different things, it's just this is my favorite color and that's your favorite color. I don't really have a place to argue. No, that should not be your favorite color,
Right.
right? So they can come up with ways to like say, oh, I believe this and here's my reason. It might be better for me. It might make everybody in the society generally happier. Whatever. The point is, when there's disagreement,
How do you get to a point of agreement?
yeah, for them there's no right or wrong. It's just two
Mhm.
people have different opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for atheists and their own morality, I think two things might come in play. Was like mainly one, but it's like evolutionary. Like they realize that you have to be like a good social member, and that if you want to be a good social member, you have to be like the good person, and that's how you get accepted to like the group, and like you get friendships and all that, and that's how you survive better. And I also think like so far society, the way it's built up, the incentives is to do good. Like you, so far right now, so like you're seen better the more good you do.
Yeah.
That's what the incentives are right now. I just repeat myself. But it's like once the incentives change, or if like once like you're in a position where the bad is better for you than the good, like I don't know, like to steal something. Just because like at that moment it's better for you to steal than to like wait and like get paid and buy it right there then.
Right.
It's much more blurred when like there's no morals or the foundation's gone. I would say.
Yeah.
And kind of to go back to Nietzsche, the story that you kind of touched on, I just want to tell that story. So the story is about a madman who goes to town in the morning and he starts like yelling out like where God is.
Crazy man.
Yeah, well, the madman, yeah. And so, but all the villagers, they're all atheists. So they start like mocking him, like, oh, is he lost? Like a little kid. And so then the madman goes into like a speech and he starts talking about like how we killed God. And like how could we drink up the sea? It's like how could we defeat this giant
Right.
of like our culture? And he compares the situation of killing God to unchaining the earth from the sun. So he says, we unchain the earth from the sun and now we're hurling into the darkness, right? And that's what he compares killing God to. And remember, this is an atheist saying this. So, I mean, they don't believe in God, but what he did believe in was like that it was the anchor for our society and especially the morals of our society. And so now that that anchor is gone, society is now hurling into the darkness. And then he goes on to say, what festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? And there he means what we have to make our morality ourselves. We can't rely on the biblical morality or God's morality. We have to make our morality ourselves, and we're going to make sacred games. We're going to have to invent sacred games to do that.
Right.
And then he says, is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? So here he's saying we're going to have to become our own gods. We're going to have to decide our own morality. And he's kind of scared of it because he says the greatness of this deed is too great for us, right? Right. And I mean, just think about it, that there's millions of factors coming in, and you have to decide what is the moral action for yourself. And so Nietzsche saw this. And just to finish the story, the madman then falls silent, and all the townspeople are just silent. And then he says that he came too early. He realizes that he came too early, that his time has not yet come, and he just leaves. Okay, so the idea lines up with what you were saying, how it wouldn't be an immediate change to like, oh, you kill God and then boom, it's just like chaos. It would be a slow thing, and a lot of the atheists are like laughing at them. They don't see this as a problem, and what the madman sees is that eventually they will, that society will eventually, as the foundation is torn away, the structure of our morality will fall down, and we're gonna try to make it up ourselves, but who knows how that's gonna go,
Mm-hmm.
right? And or you want to say
No,
something?
good.
So just this is related to an idea that in like psychology and evolution, it's that we're unique among the animals because we're self-conscious.
Yeah.
We can make decisions that go against our instincts, and a consequence of that we don't really think about is that every animal is evolving and we're evolving, but we are in the unique position of being able to control where that evolution goes, right? So when we as a society decide on a value change, that has implications for where we will evolve in the future, right? So if we remove a value of, say, camaraderie or so like a Christian thing is the tithing, like being generous. With the atheist, there's not really a point to that so to lose like the values of Christianity would lead to incentives further down, which is what Jonathan was saying. The incentives will change eventually because we're plastic creatures. We're going to change according to what we want. So our values are going to change, and that's what Nietzsche and Dostoevsky were scared of. Where would humanity go after that foundation is gone? Like, where will the incentives be, and what will our new values be after we evolve to accommodate whatever we do today?
Yeah. And I think we don't, like you said, we don't completely see like chaos or anarchy yet. But I do think that we can definitely see the effects of losing certain traditions or morals. Especially started first with Europe, that they're considered a post-Christian society, but they seem to be fine so far. And even some people would say that the U.S. is a post-Christian as well. But to tie it more to our current society, you see that everything that people have put trust in has failed them, especially in the last 10 years. So people that have put their trust in the government has completely failed them, and it's no one would argue with that. People that have put their trust in certain people in power, celebrities, we saw it with the Me Too movement, it completely failed. People that have put their trust in even religion, even churches, like certain pastors that have morally failed, or organizations that have failed. So time and time again, what we put our trust in, we see that once we lost certain direction or certain morals, that we were failed. And I think if we go down that path, then it's inevitable that it's a path of destruction long term. And ultimately, these things that, whether it's an organization or a person or a figure that we're putting our trust in, the common thread here is that they're people, right? So we're putting our trust in people, and people are going to fail us, even if they have the title of a Christian or someone who's morally good.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that, but
I think this whole conversation just reminds me of all like the post-apocalyptic movies and books, and like how they just like show society like falling into this chaotic thing. And if it ever gets to a point where it comes out of this chaotic thing, it's like this super immoral, like Hunger Games type, where like you have like the super high people that are like rich and they get everything, and then you have the poor people that have to fight for everything. And then it also reminds me of like Lord of the Flies. I don't know if you guys read that book in school, but just like
freshman year.
Or there's also been like shows done where they like isolate children and they try to see how they act when they don't have adults like telling them like what is good and what is bad, and how they start treating other kids and like treating other things. But it's just like this idea, because we might think, oh no, even if we don't have God, we still have a moral compass that we can follow. But then it's just like I feel like we've said this a bit, but it unravels. It gets to a point where it just like falls apart. And if there's no one there to teach you or to tell you like what that foundation of what your morality should be, then it's like, how do you make sure that you stick with it? And we talked about this a little bit in our last Portal episode when we were talking about like, we as Christians, a lot of time we have to fight against like our primitive brain, like what we want to do, because we want to become better. We want to do we want to live by the morality that is set by God, like in our religious life, in our normal life. We just want to live by that. So we constantly have like this pull that's like trying to take us away from like a primitive way of living, and I like wonder like where does that pull even exist, if it does at all, with people that don't have God as a compass, that don't have that Christian foundation of what we believe. And I just want to clarify that just because we have that foundation, because we do have that foundation in God of the value of human life and like the way we should treat each other, but I know that we've had really bad like historical events where Christians don't adhere to that, and unfortunately that's just it's not really an argument to like argue about the morality of like individual, right? Yeah, right? Exactly.
Like, I think we can all imagine an atheist that's that's more moral than a Christian. Right? It's a lot. It has to do more with the big scale of like society and in the future where we're headed and kind of things like that.
Yeah, I just feel like too, like that's like a lot of the arguments that atheists bring up. Like they talk about like people in leadership that were Christians and like they did all these things, and it's like, how can you talk about having like moral standards when you have Christians doing this and this? But like the truth is that exists in any person, in any worldview. You know, like that's not just something that's what do you call it, individual to Christianity, but maybe it's something that's pointed out more in Christians just because of what we believe in and what. And
also, I don't think it's fair to put the blame on Christianity, because in these events, the actions that these people were perpetrating weren't aligning with actual Christianity, or what we see in Scripture. Exactly. So at that point, it was the people. It wasn't what we see in the Bible or what Christ taught us. So exactly, that doesn't really fly either when you're arguing against Christianity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess like with the problem with Christianity, like the problems that happened there was like it was the people that was flawed.
Right.
I guess for what we would say is that for the atheists, it's more the ideology that's flawed.
Right.
Yeah. I was like thinking about, you said earlier, like the apocalyptic world. You're feeling like, I just feel like we had hints of that in like the history a little bit, especially with like the Stalin and Mao, where like if you combine them, there's like 60 million people and extra deaths. And I know like it's not like they say, oh, like there is no God, anything's permitted, and then they started killing people. But I just feel like when the things went bad, I just feel that like when they were like killing people, God never went inside their minds.
Right.
And it was like the way they acted was if God wasn't watching what they were doing, and that was the problem. Right. It wasn't like, oh, I'm atheist now,
I can do whatever I want.
It's like I can shoot someone.
Yeah.
But it was more like they never thought, or the inclination to think about what they did never appeared to them as much as they would if they were Christian.
Right. Or like, it's just like it's steps. It like builds up. Like I feel like once you have the idea, like, oh, like no one's watching, no one's, caring about what I do. Like I'm not gonna, suffer the consequences of what I do. Like it's just slowly building up. It'll slowly build up, which is what we always talk about. Like it's gonna unravel. It's gonna get to a point where it's just gonna be completely chaotic if you don't have that to ground yourself in.
The signs that I see have a lot to do with, I think, the morality of society for the first time is starting to separate from the morality of the church. So like I think the most obvious example would be like the abortion, where a lot of people would see the church's stance on abortion as not moral. Right. So that's an example of a moral rule that was written by humans, right? And so how you're saying that the humans view, or Christians view, human life as, or the word I use is an end in and of itself. And so what that means is that, so like you can say like eating healthy is good, but it's not a good in and of itself, because you're only using that to become healthy or fit, right? It's not your end goal. It's just the way you're using to get to the end goal,
Right.
right? So it's not good in and of itself. It's only good in its consequence, which is being healthy, right?
So like you'll stop eating healthy once it stops making you healthy.
Yeah. So
Immediately.
where the Christian views the human life as a good in and of itself, right? And so the abortion argument is just a tiny poke in that value, because now it's like that human life is no longer good in and of itself. It's like the fact that I don't have enough money or things like that is what overrides that good, which having money is not a good in and of itself, but the human life is.
The human life
right?
is, yeah.
So it's a tiny poke in that value, in that biblical value, and it's that tiny hole, like in a balloon, that's going to slowly grow and deflate the bubble, right? And so that's where I see what Nietzsche and Dostoevsky predicted coming into like society, and there's other examples, but I think that's like the most clear one.
Yeah, and not only that, like the society's acceptance of abortion, but society's acceptance of celebrating abortion. Like, because just like there was a Me Too movement for like speaking up against being like sexually harassed, there was also, I don't know what they called it, but there was also a movement of like encouraging women to like encourage other women to get abortions, of like telling their stories like it's okay if you get an abortion because I got one, like kind of like doing stuff like that, and kind of like, you know, so it's not just like society moving towards the acceptance of abortion more and more, but like towards celebrating it, like, you know.
Yeah. And the point is that value, even if you may not see it as dangerous today, the little shift in that value will like snowball into something in the future. Or if we no longer see humans as a good in and of itself completely, what more are we allowing to pass by, right? And what will we allow into the future?
Yeah, I mean, and we see it now, especially with all the movements against racism too. Just like the fact that people can degrade someone because of their race, of the color of their skin, and it's like we place value on people because they're human beings. Like nothing else apart from that takes away their value, because we believe everyone is made in the image of God. Doesn't matter what race you are, doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter even what religion you are or you have, or what you believe in. Like you are made in the image of God and you have value.
Yeah, and I think we can move on to, I guess, the big one, the existence of God. And here I've written down the kalam, cosmological argument, which I think is probably the most popular argument in like theism. And it's only 3 sentences. It fits in like a little tiny thing. And so I'm just going to read them. 1, it's that everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. And 3, the conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. And an interesting thing to note is that this argument does not say God in it, does not say Christian in it. Because the conclusion of this argument is just that the universe has a cause. That's all this argument is trying to prove.
It has a beginning. It has a cause because it has a beginning.
Yeah. So there are a few things that we'll be able to like figure out about this cause, but that's just the conclusion of the argument. So like it's just like common counter to this is like that doesn't get you the Christian God. It's like it's not meant to, right? This is the role of this argument, and we'll explain how it goes past that in a bit.
Yeah.
So I think, well, just before we go, does anybody have anything to say? Okay. So the biggest point is, I guess, the universe began to exist. That's the one that's usually attacked first.
Yeah.
And to defend this, a lot of like modern Christians will use science, like the Big Bang Theory, but I think the original arguments defending it from like the 1700s are a lot better. And those deal with philosophy, so they're not dependent on any science. And so those deal with infinity and how infinity manifests itself in our reality. So there's two types of infinities, potential and actual infinities. A potential infinity is something that is not actually infinite. So you can imagine an immortal being counting. So just 1, 2, 3 forever. He's going to be counting forever. And you say, like, what is that guy counting to? And you'll say infinity, right? But at no point in the future will he have counted an infinite numbers. He'll never be like, yeah, I'm done. I don't have to count anymore, right? He's always going to be counting. So he's never going to actually reach infinity. So he's not actually infinite. It is a potentially infinite that he's counting to, because it's just slowly growing, but it's never going to reach infinity. And actual infinity, on the other hand, is something that's actually infinite. So you can imagine just a list appearing that has every single number written on it, and it goes on forever. If that list is complete, then that's an actually infinite entity.
Right.
Right. So the distinction to make here is that one of them is built by adding one thing after another, and the other one came in all at once.
Okay.
Right. So the thing is that when you make something one by one, like the guy counting, he will never reach infinite. So anything that's built one by one has to be a potential infinite. And that, so if anything's ever built one by one, you'll know it'll never be an infinite thing. Right. So with that, we can think about time and what time is in our universe. And time is just a series of events, one after another. So, we set up the cameras, we all sat down in the chair, we all started talking, right?
Right.
And it was just a series of events. There's millions of things happening all over the universe, but it's a list just being grown on one at a time. And because that list is being grown on one at a time, we know that it's a potentially infinite and not an actual infinite. And so if it's a potential infinite, if it's being added one by one, that means it cannot be infinite in its actuality. It's finite and it's growing forever, but it's never going to be infinite. So if it's finite, that means there had to be a beginning. Yeah, there had to be a beginning. And so that's how we know that the universe began.
Yeah.
Because its components are built one at a time, and we know that potential infinites cannot be infinite. Right? That makes sense.
It does make sense.
And so, and the other claim, so everything that began to exist has a cause, and then the universe began to exist. So number one, everything that began to exist has a cause. That just comes from common experience or common sense. Every time we see something begin to exist, there's always a cause, right? Every time this computer began to exist for a cause, a baby began to exist for a cause. Everything that we see began to...
Something caused it.
Yeah. And so that is just something that we see happen. We have seen it happen 100% of the times before, so it's a high enough confidence to claim that, right? So with those two claims, everything that began to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist. If those two are true, then the third one has to be true. The universe has a cause, right? And here we're defining universe as anything that is material, in space, or in time, because all those are features inherent to the universe, right? Especially space and time, which according to Einstein's theory are the same. They're like tied together. So anytime there's space, there's going to be time, and every time there's time, there's going to be space. So immaterial and space-time. So if everything that's material and space-time began to exist at some point, and there was a cause, that cause had to come outside of that universe, right? Because something cannot cause itself, right? So that if that thing was out of the universe, it therefore cannot be material or part of space-time. So whatever created that universe had to be immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. And all three of these are properties we associate with God, right?
Crazy.
So there's two categories of objects that we identify as immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. The first one is numbers or ideas, just pretty much anything immaterial. So numbers, obviously, they're not affected by time. They don't take up space, and they're not made out of anything. They're just ideas. And the other one we could think as a being, a God, right? God would be an immaterial, timeless, and spaceless being. So the question is, this universe gets you to a cause had to be one of these two things, a being or an idea, but how can you say that one of these was them, right? And so the thing to think about here is causation. So there's an idea of something being sufficient, a cause being sufficient to have an effect. So one thing you can imagine is a match, and the little thing you rub it up against.
Yeah.
Right? When I just have them separately, they are not sufficient to create fire.
Right.
Right. They're only sufficient to create fire in the moment where there's friction between them. So, right. So, if this cause is something like an idea, a number, these don't change. So, if it doesn't change, it's either sufficient or insufficient. Right. So, if it was always sufficient, like if the match was always sufficient, it would always be starting fires forever. Right? If it was always insufficient, it would never be starting a fire. Right? But we know the universe was just created at one point in time. So it doesn't make sense for it to be something that is unchanging, or not unchanging, just something with no personhood, like an idea. Right? So we're only left with the personal being that created that was the cause, because it was only something that happened. It was sufficient at one moment, but insufficient at another moment. So this immaterial, timeless, and spaceless thing had to also be a personal being. So there we have four properties of the cause, gained from the kalam, cosmological argument, and
so immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and has to be a personal being.
Yeah. And then if you combine that with the moral argument, you get moral, right? And you get those five, which gets
inherently good.
Yeah. And that gets you pretty close to the Christian God. Obviously not all the way, but that's just the scope of the argument.
Right. That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to find a way to explain it, like in lesser.
I guess the question would be, from that, then how do we get to the Christian God, and how would we defend or explain why the Christian God, or why Christianity makes the most sense?
Well, I mean, I guess that just has to do with what you're constant looking for a God that fits that description.
Right.
In Christianity, the Christian God is the only God that fits, especially when you tie in the moral good,
right,
with a being that is timeless. What was the other thing?
Immaterial,
timeless, spaceless, and that is morally good. I think the Christian God is the only God to fit that description.
Yeah. So, and especially like if you can imagine like the Greek gods, none of those. All the Greek gods began to exist at some point. And so
they weren't even real.
Right,
yeah, but if you read like the Greek mythology and like how they were born, how they were created.
So
the good stories though.
Those gods aren't foundational enough to even be considered at all justified by this argument, right? And this God also had to be very powerful and a creator. It created the universe and created the universe that's powerful and a creator. And so so gods like gods of destruction, gods of smaller gods like Thor or
Right.
Native American gods. None of those gods
Are strong enough.
are like, yeah, they're not strong, or they're not foundational enough
Mm-hmm.
to really be defended by this argument.
Right.
I think another or the best explanation that I've come across in explaining or defending the Christian God or Christianity has been from an actual apologist named Ravi Zacharias, which actually died. I think it was this year.
Yeah.
But he's actually one of the most known apologists, and he explains it as, or he had a message that he would go to, and basically it was origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So he explained these are the 4 biggest questions that humans have. Origin, meaning where did we come from?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, like what is the meaning of life? Like
Mm-hmm.
why are we here? Morality, which would be what we touched on, good and evil. What is something good? Why is it evil? And then destiny, which is where are we headed?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we can't go in detail, but he explains how Christianity makes the most sense to answer all these questions
Mm-hmm.
in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Out of any religion, out of any philosophy, Christianity makes the best argument to satisfy these 4 big questions, I guess.
I mean, I just want to say something, but it kind of goes against it. But I just found it interesting. It was like this philosopher Pascal, who basically his whole point was that he was trying to take away God from philosophy, and that his big line was that the God of the philosophers is not the God of Abraham. Basically, his whole point is our God is hidden, and basically his goal was that he's trying to take away God away in terms of philosophy, and that way it can't be broken down, and that's why you can't lead to God is dead.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his whole point is that like it's like the comparison to like the Tower of Babel
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
is that like we're trying to put God in our own terms,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we failed. That's
Right.
how we failed basically in God's eyes, and that's what the philosophers are trying to do.
Right.
And I just found that, I'm not sure if I agree or not, but I just found that interesting in his point and he was trying to make with that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of true.
Yeah.
Which is why we said to like this is like the closest
Right.
probably that we're gonna get into like explaining who God is through philosophy.
Right.
Because there's just so much more to God that like isn't explained by this. But this gets us close enough to God to where it's like, why would you believe in anything else?
Right.
In any other religion with any other type of God that's not all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously it's God, so there's no way we could ever come to fully understand or even explain how he is.
Yeah.
But what we believe as Christians is through his word, he has revealed himself, especially through Jesus,
Yes.
through his son. So that's what we have.
Mm-hmm.
So anything outside of that, that contradicts that, just wouldn't align.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, yes, we are limited in how we can understand him because we're human and our minds are limited.
Yeah.
But he did decide to reveal himself
Mm-hmm.
and to show us his preferences and his character and how he views us and what his characteristics are. And obviously through Jesus, that's the example we have of
Yeah.
how we get to know or even come close to understand who God is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's both. I think we cannot, put him in a box or
Yeah.
explain him or fully understand him. But I think through Jesus we can come to know him, I guess, in as limited as that may be on this earth.
Right. Yeah, and I think it also goes back to like the definition of apologetics. Apologetics isn't trying to like define God. Like that's not what they're setting out to do.
Mm-hmm.
What they see is a attack on Christianity from say atheists or philosophers, and they're trying to defend that no, my belief is not absurd or
Right.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So the atheist comes with this problem and the apologist tries to defend their belief, right? And so, yeah, so like it should be, I think it's especially, I think it's important today because I think, at least from what I saw, a lot of atheists that I saw like in my school, it was mainly like philosophical problems, right? Obviously there's some like moral problems and things like that, but a lot of it was philosophical problems. So I think for those people, maybe apologetics would be a lot more useful than, just giving them the word or things like that, right?
Right. Yeah. I think there's definitely different approaches to sharing the word, sharing God to people. And some people need apologetics. Some people just need the word of God. Some people just need you as a person to approach them and talk with them and be with them. Some people just need an experience,
right?
So it's definitely different for everyone. Apologetics isn't going to be for everyone. Not everyone's going to see this video and be like, this is interesting. I get this. This is what I've been needing to, know more about why I believe what I believe. Not everyone's going to feel that way about it. But that's just, I think, one of the best and most beautiful parts of Christianity, that like a lot of people can experience so many different things and they'll all lead to one point, to God, to our Christian God. I just wanted to talk a little bit, I don't know if this is going to lead anywhere, but talk a little bit more about the existence of God, especially as the creator of the universe. Because like sometimes it just baffles my mind that people think that the universe just came from nothing, that like it just popped out of nowhere. And like even just like the Big Bang Theory is like a theory, hasn't been proven, but just like the idea that like, because I don't even know like the specifics of the Big Bang Theory, but either they believe that it just came from nothing, or there was a little something that exploded and then the universe came from that. But just like, I don't know, like it just baffles my mind like how people, or how we can think that the universe came from nothing. Or I don't know if you guys know what the Big Bang Theory says exactly.
That's all I know, is that there was nothing and then
there
poof,
was something.
And the show just appeared.
Yeah. Then we got a bad show out of it.
Yeah, so
that's as far as I don't know the specifics.
In terms of like just theory, so there's something called like the quantum field, or there's a bunch of quantum fields, but so you can imagine a field is something where there's a value everywhere. So it's just like it's like a weird like nothing, but it's sort of just like a mathematical entity. And so any particle, so like an electron, is a fluctuation in that field, like a wave in that field. So what we can see now is when you look at empty space, there's random particles that pop in and out of existence, and they call these like virtual photons, right? So the theory is either that the whole universe is kind of like those virtual photons where it just popped in and it's still to like pop out, or it's never going to pop out. Other theories are like maybe the Big Bang wasn't actually the beginning, maybe it was just really dense and small, but there's something before that. But the important thing to note is that when we say the universe began to exist in the cosmological argument, if the Big Bang was not the first thing, if it was just small and then there's stuff before that, when we say the universe, we mean everything that's material, space, or time.
So whatever happened before the Big Bang,
yeah,
we're talking
is
about
included,
that too.
right? So any science on the Big Bang doesn't really affect the cosmological argument, right? And the second point is that if it was the beginning of the universe and it came from that quantum field is still nothing. It's still it's the quantum field, right? And that's the problem, is that people don't really treat nothing like nothing, right? So when we think of nothing, you have to think, right? So a lot of people just think about black, right? But that's not nothing, that's black, right? When you think about nothing, a really old example, I don't know if it's like from Aristotle or something, you have to imagine what rocks dream about, right? So
Okay.
that's two steps removed from nothing. First, you imagine a rock, and then its dream.
Yeah.
And so you're not even thinking about, is it black? It's like you're just not even thinking about it because
Yeah,
there's
'cause
nothing
it's
there.
nothing.
Right. So you're like, that's a little bit of a better example of what nothing is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the atheist position is now that rock's dream is what created the universe,
Yeah.
which is, I think, a lot more absurd than
Right.
A
God.
creator.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it for this episode of Portal. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this. So let me just summarize that through this conversation, we came to the conclusion that there is a creator for this universe that is immaterial, timeless, spaceless, personal, and has morale. And so yeah, I hope you guys liked it. If you left this video with more questions than answers, you can send us questions. You guys can send us whatever questions, comments you guys have on that, and maybe we'll make more videos to answer those questions. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week with our next Portal episode. Bye.
Review us on iTunes.